I spent 16 full cycles teaching at a combat academy, and I honestly thought I had a solid grasp on what strength really meant. Then one human chose silence instead of surrender, and everything I believed about power got turned upside down. I've been an instructor at the Valorian Prime Combat Academy for a long time, long enough to understand how deeply we rely on tradition. Tradition keeps things running smoothly. It enforces discipline, preserves standards, and, before anyone gets all emotional about it, sometimes that tradition includes letting new recruits get knocked around a little. That's how we figure out who's worth keeping and who's just burning oxygen. So when the Galactic Council, in all their glorious wisdom, decided humans should be admitted to our academy, we weren't worried. Not even a little. We assumed the hazing would take care of itself in a week. 2 weeks at most. I mean, come on. These soft, pink creatures from Earth looked like they'd bruise if you sneezed too close. The Lecrathan warriors took one look at the incoming human class and practically started salivating. Fresh meat. Easy prey. And we instructors? We stuck to business as usual. We turned our heads and let nature do what it always does. The academy runs on one very simple rule. Survival favors the strongest. And sitting comfortably at the top of that food chain were the Lecrathan. 7 feet tall, bodies packed with scales and muscle, 4 arms strong enough to bend steel, and a cultural obsession with dominance that somehow makes them unbearable in combat and insufferable at social gatherings. Their pack leader was a brute named Jarek, a truly unpleasant specimen who ruled the trainee barracks like his own private empire. His horns were filed to razor points, his face crisscrossed with scars worn like medals, and his voice sounded like rocks being ground through machinery. He had that look, the one that tells you he enjoys cruelty just a little too much. The hierarchy was obvious. Lecrathan at the top, no question. Below them were the Thoraxians, insectoid fighters with exoskeletons tough enough to shrug off most attacks. Then came the Sulfin, aquatic species whose tentacles hid surprising strength. The Dravic fire-breathers filled out the middle ranks, and at the very bottom, struggling to hold on to both air and dignity, were whoever drew the short straw that cycle, which, unfortunately, meant the humans. The system itself was simple. Senior trainees were allowed to challenge juniors to combat drills. All perfectly legal, officially sanctioned, and wrapped up in educational language. What the regulations failed to mention were the important details, like how hard you could strike, how long a drill could drag on, or what happened when 5 Lecrathan decided to train one human at the same time. We instructors observed from above. Sometimes we took notes. More often, we sipped our stimulants and reminded ourselves that warriors are forged through hardship, not coddled with kindness. Jarek, in particular, had a real gift for exploiting loopholes. Accidental shoulder checks in narrow corridors, equipment failures during sparring, training exercises that somehow always ended with humans limping toward the medical bay. And the best part? Every incident stayed technically within the rules. The Lecrathan weren't dumb, just cruel. There's a difference. The other species caught on quickly. If you didn't want to become the next target, you either participated or disappeared. Most chose to fade into the background. A few decided throwing punches was better than taking them. The humans did neither. They endured it. Every single day. Week after week. They showed up, got beaten down, dragged themselves back to their feet, and returned for more. We thought they were idiots. Maybe stubborn in an admirable way, but still idiots. We had no idea what was building underneath that silence. Ethan Cole looked like the kind of human who wouldn't last 3 weeks. Thin frame, maybe 6 feet tall, which made him undersized by academy standards. Brown hair trimmed neatly to regulation, probably hoping it would help him blend in. It didn't. His green eyes still carried a spark of optimism when he arrived, and honestly, that made it worse. Optimism doesn't survive long in this galaxy. To his credit, he tried. He showed up early for every session, studied combat modules until his eyes were bloodshot, Practiced defensive forms alone in the gym when he thought no one was watching. A good kid, doomed, but decent. Jarek noticed him on day 2. Of course he did. Predators always single out the weakest prey first. Basic biology. And Ethan made the fatal human mistake of holding eye contact. In Krithin culture, that's a challenge. In human culture, apparently, it's just manners. Cultural misunderstandings stop being funny once someone ends up hospitalized. The first beating came during hand-to-hand drills. Jarek volunteered to demonstrate a grappling technique. Ethan walked away with 3 cracked ribs and a concussion that left him seeing double for days. Jarek called it accidental excessive force. Medical logged it. Ethan got patched up and sent straight back to training. The second incident happened on the obstacle course. A Krithin foot accidentally caught Ethan mid-run. He fell 15 feet onto concrete plating. Dislocated shoulder, fractured wrist. The report labeled it an unfortunate training accident. By week 4, Ethan's skin was a map of bruises blooming in every ugly color imaginable. His left eye stayed swollen shut. He limped constantly, trying and failing to hide it. The other humans watched quietly. Their expressions weren't just angry, they were focused, measuring, waiting. We assumed they were waiting for Ethan to quit. Humans are pack creatures. Once the weakest fell away, the abuse would spread elsewhere. That's how it usually goes. We couldn't have been more wrong. The moment came during weapons qualification. Ethan stood at his station, carefully running through the plasma rifle assembly drill. Disassemble, clean, reassemble, safety check, basic competency. The kind of task even a Dravik hatchling could manage blindfolded. Jarek and 4 of his Krithin followers closed in around him. That part wasn't unusual. They did this regularly, like predators circling blood in the water. What was different was Jarek's expression. He wasn't amused anymore. He wasn't playing. "I'm finished playing with you, human," Jarek growled, crossing all 4 arms in that aggressive Krithin stance they're so fond of. And that was the moment everything finally changed. "Your technique is sloppy. You need more instruction." Ethan didn't even lift his head. Smart move. Real smart. "Sir, my assembly time is within regulation limits." That "sir" was something special. Perfectly respectful on the surface, technically correct, and absolutely soaked in quiet defiance. I almost admired it from my perch on the observation platform. Almost felt sorry for what I knew was coming next. Almost. Jarek's response was immediate. One massive hand shot out, clamped around Ethan's throat, and lifted him straight off the floor like he weighed nothing. The plasma rifle slipped from Ethan's fingers and hit the deck with a sharp clatter. Ethan grabbed at Jarek's wrist, trying desperately to pry those fingers loose, legs kicking uselessly in the air. His face began turning a deep, alarming shade of purple. "When I offer instruction," Jarek said slowly, savoring every word, "you accept it with gratitude." Then he hurled Ethan across the training hall. And I don't mean tossed, I mean thrown. The kid sailed a good 12 feet before slamming into an equipment rack. The sound made even me flinch. Metal breaking sounds nothing like bones breaking, and that impact had plenty of both. Ethan collapsed in a heap, sucking in air, probably trying to decide which injury hurt the worst. For the record, it was all of them. The other Krithin laughed, that awful clicking noise they make when entertained. Several trainees from other species suddenly found their drills fascinating, very focused, very busy. The humans, though? No. 6 of them were spread around the hall, and every single one had gone completely still. They weren't looking at Ethan. They were looking at each other. Silent communication passed between them through brief glances and tiny nods. Hands relaxed. Breathing slowed. Every piece of their body language screamed tension wound tight, like springs just waiting to snap. Jarek spoke again, directing his voice at Ethan, who was struggling to push himself up on trembling arms. Blood dripped from somewhere along his hairline, tapping against the floor in a steady rhythm. Fragile human drops marking time on academy tiles. "Get up," Jarek ordered. "We are not finished with your lesson." Ethan managed hands and knees, swaying. One of the humans, a stocky woman with dark skin and even darker eyes, stepped forward. A tall, blonde human immediately put a hand on her shoulder. "Stop," he murmured. "Wait." Wait for what? I wondered. For Ethan to die? For Jarek to lose interest? For some impossible miracle? Turns out, yes. They were waiting for a miracle. And she arrived right on schedule. The training hall doors hissed open, the sound slicing through Jarek's laughter like a blade. Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance didn't simply walk into the room. She entered the space the way gravity does, sudden, undeniable, and absolute. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Even Jarek froze mid-boast, staring at whatever had just shifted the pressure in the room. By Crethan standards, she wasn't physically imposing. Maybe 5'9", athletic build, dark hair pulled back into a regulation braid. She wore standard human fatigues, but the insignia on her chest made my secondary stomach sink the moment I recognized them. Terra Special Operations Command, 3 Combat Service Medals, and the Silver Star. The kind awarded when the details are so classified, they don't even bother pretending to explain them. Oh no. I knew exactly who she was. Every instructor did. The council had circulated her file when the Human Integration Program was announced. Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance, decorated veteran of the Outer Rim pacification campaigns. 15 confirmed hostile engagements, 0 losses under her command. Specialist in what humans politely call close quarters battle, which is their way of saying she kills people with her hands when she runs out of ammo. She was not supposed to be here. She was meant to be 3 systems away doing liaison work with the Valtorian fleet. Her presence in this academy, in this hall, at this exact moment, felt like the universe tapping me on the shoulder and saying my job was about to become a nightmare. The humans snapped to attention instantly, like someone flipped a switch. The stocky woman stood straight. The blonde squared his shoulders. Even Ethan, bleeding and shattered on the floor, tried to sit up a little taller. Mara's eyes swept the room once. Just once. She took everything in with the calm efficiency of a predator deciding whether you're food or a challenge. Her gaze paused on Ethan for exactly 2 seconds, then shifted to Jarek, then to his 4 suddenly unimpressive friends, then drifted upward to the observation platform, where I became deeply invested in my datapad. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees, and I swear on my ancestors' scales it had nothing to do with climate control. Mara Vance stood in that doorway for 5 full seconds, doing nothing but breathing and existing in a way that made everyone painfully aware of their own mortality. Here's something they never teach you during instructor training. Every species has predators. Somewhere in our evolutionary past, we all learned what it feels like to be hunted, or to hunt, or to stand very still and prey. The thing with teeth doesn't notice us. That recognition, deep, ancient, hardwired, cuts across species lines. It's the one language everyone understands. Jarek was staring at a predator, and you could see the exact moment it sank in. His crossed arms loosened, his weight shifted back just a fraction. That constant forward lean, the posture that said, "I own this space," evaporated like ice under a thermal lance. His friends, the Crethan who had been laughing seconds earlier, suddenly found reasons to check their gear. One took an unconscious step back. Another became deeply fascinated by the ceiling panels. Mara still hadn't spoken. She just looked at Jarek. Her eyes were flat, cold, empty of anything even remotely resembling mercy. Human eyes are unsettling like that. All that white around the iris makes it painfully obvious exactly where they're focused. And right then, every bit of that focus was on him. That feature evolved differently depending on who you were. Prey species developed it to organize group defense, while predators evolved it to synchronize pack hunts. Take a wild guess which one we were looking at right then. She tilted her head just a little to the left. It was barely a motion. 5 degrees at most. Still, Jarek flinched like he'd been struck. This was a 7-foot-tall, 4-armed war beast who had been tossing humans around like chew toys 5 minutes earlier, and he just flinched at a head tilt. The silence stretched thin and tight. Someone's gear was quietly humming. Someone else was breathing way too loud. Ethan was still down on the floor, bleeding freely, watching the whole thing with a look that mixed relief and deep personal satisfaction. The rest of the humans hadn't moved an inch, but everything about them had changed. They weren't wound tight anymore. They weren't fighters waiting to spring. They were spectators, watching their favorite show. Jarek cracked first. Naturally. This was an authorized training exercise, he said, and honestly, hearing the defensive edge creep into his voice was almost beautiful. A regulated combat drill. The human was simply being instructed in proper defensive methods. Mara raised one eyebrow, just one, maybe half an inch. Jarek took a full step backward. That's when she started walking. Slow, deliberate steps across the training hall floor. Calm, measured. Her boots made soft sounds against the tile. Tap, 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 like a countdown to something that couldn't be stopped. She passed right by Jarek, close enough that he could have grabbed her with any one of his arms. He didn't. He wouldn't. He couldn't. She went straight to Ethan and crouched beside him. Didn't touch him. Just looked him over, quick and professional. Like she was checking off a list. Broken ribs, most likely. A concussion for sure. Cuts, bruises, the whole ugly inventory you get when a fragile human meets an angry Krathon. "Can you stand, Trainee Cole?" she asked quietly. Her voice was calm, casual. The same tone you'd use talking about the weather or what to eat for lunch. In that moment, it was horrifying. Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." And then he stood, shaky, bleeding. Probably held together by adrenaline and stubborn human pride, but he got upright. Mara rose with him, turned, and faced Jarek again, Ethan just behind her shoulder. That flat, empty stare was back in full force. "We need to have a conversation," she said. Still quiet, still conversational, still terrifying. About how we define the word drill. That's when I started mentally updating my resume. This was about to go bad. Jarek tried to pull himself together. To his credit, the idiot had guts. Suicidal, terminally stupid guts, but guts all the same. "I do not answer to human officers," he said, straightening to his full height. "This is a galactic academy. Your rank has no authority here." Mara smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind sharks probably invented first, and humans only borrow for very special moments. "You're absolutely right, Trainee Jarek," she said, her voice smooth as honey and just as cold. "I have no authority over you in this environment. I'm merely an observer. So let me observe out loud, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken." She began walking a slow circle around him. Her hands were clasped behind her back, posture relaxed, like a professor mid-lecture. "I observe one trainee who is significantly larger and stronger than another. I observe that same trainee using what you call a drill to cause injuries requiring medical attention. I observe 4 additional trainees assisting in this behavior. I observe training staff." She glanced up at our observation platform, and my spine turned to liquid, watching without intervening. Jarek's jaw tightened. "That is how warriors are forged," he said. "The weak are culled. The strong endure." "Tradition," Mara repeated softly, like she was rolling the word around and finding it bitter. "Let me explain human tradition, Jarek. When someone in our unit is injured, we don't stand around watching. We don't call it teaching. We don't let it continue because it builds character." She stopped pacing and stepped directly into his space. He was still bigger, still taller, still had twice the arms. None of it mattered. "When someone harms our people," she went on, her voice dropping even lower, "we follow a different custom. We identify the threat. We determine the appropriate response, and then we eliminate the threat permanently." That word, permanently, hung in the air like a dropped blade. Are you threatening me? Jarek asked, trying to sound offended. It came out shaky. Threatening? Mara looked honestly confused. No, trainee. I'm educating you. You believe in learning through physical demonstration, yes? You believe the body understands lessons the mind refuses to grasp. Humans believe the same thing. She leaned closer. Jarek leaned away. The difference is, when we teach a lesson, we make sure it only needs to be taught once. Repetition is wasteful. We prefer permanent behavioral correction. From the observation deck, I saw Instructor Drovek, a Thoraxian with 16 years on record, visibly squirming in his seat. Instructor Tharnok had his hand over his face. This was a catastrophe. A stunning, terrifying catastrophe. Mara stepped back, her smile returning. Professional courtesy slid back into place like armor snapping shut. But of course you're correct. I have no authority here. I'm simply overseeing the human integration program, ensuring our trainees are adjusting appropriately to academy culture. Her eyes flicked to Ethan, still upright, even though he looked like he'd been fed through a waste processor. They appear to be adapting quite well, learning many valuable lessons about hierarchy and tradition. She turned her gaze back to Jarek. I trust there will be no further educational opportunities today. It sounded like a question. It absolutely was not. No, ma'am, Jarek replied quietly. Outstanding, Mara said cheerfully. Carry on then. Jarek exited the training hall 30 seconds later. He didn't swagger. He didn't posture. He didn't strut. He didn't do that dominant chest-puffing thing Brack and his kind always did when they wanted everyone to know they'd won an interaction. He didn't posture at all. He just walked out. His 4 buddies scattered immediately, like loose debris after a decompression blast. All of a sudden, every one of them remembered some critically important business that needed doing anywhere but there. The stocky human woman, Navarro, according to her name tag, was already kneeling beside Ethan. She started checking his injuries with practiced efficiency. Not a lot of wasted motion. Looked like field medic training to me, probably military. The blonde guy, Bergman, based on his uniform, was already on his comms, calling in for proper medical support. The rest of the species in the training hall had gone completely silent. A Thoraxian trainee was staring at Mara like she'd just grown wings and started breathing plasma. 2 Dravik were whispering to each other, tails twitching nervously the whole time. The sulfan in the corner had gone pale, which for an aquatic species means their skin shifts from blue to almost transparent. Interesting biological stress response, totally irrelevant compared to how fast my career was about to disintegrate. Up on the observation platform, Instructor Rizak cracked first. We need to file an incident report, he said, his voice tight. About what exactly? Instructor Tharnok asked. The visiting officer checked on trainee welfare, had a discussion about training standards. Nothing actionable occurred. She threatened a trainee, Rizak insisted. Did she? I heard myself say. Because I didn't hear a threat. What I heard was a philosophical discussion about educational methodology. Very informative, actually. Learned a lot. We all knew I was lying. We also all knew it didn't matter. Mara Vance had just rewritten the entire power structure of the academy without touching anyone, without filing a single complaint, and without giving us one solid thing we could discipline her for. It was surgical. It was brilliant. And it was absolutely terrifying. Because here's what we'd just learned. Humans don't accept pecking orders the way every other species does. They don't wait their turn to get strong enough to climb the hierarchy. They don't believe in proving worth through isolated, ritualized combat. Humans are pack hunters. When one human gets hurt, the pack responds, and their response isn't to toughen up the victim, it's to remove the threat. Completely. Permanently. With ruthless efficiency. Jarek had spent weeks establishing dominance over Ethan, building his reputation, making sure every trainee understood the hierarchy. In 5 minutes, Mara had turned him into a cautionary example, and she did it without throwing a punch, without raising her voice, without breaking a single regulation. Down on the training floor, medical teams arrived and started loading Ethan onto a transport stretcher. Mara walked beside him the whole way, speaking quietly, one hand resting on his shoulder. Reassuring, protective. The other humans positioned themselves around them. Not aggressively, not obviously. Just arranged so that anyone wanting to reach Ethan would have to go through all of them first. Pack behavior. We hadn't integrated humans into the academy. We'd introduced wolves into a sheep pen and labeled them sheep because they walked upright. Mara Vance stayed for 8 days. She didn't announce it. Didn't file any paperwork explaining why she was still there. She just kept showing up to training sessions. Sat with us instructors on the observation deck, took notes on her datapad, and flashed that terrifying smile whenever anyone asked how long she planned to remain. The effect was immediate and total. Ulthar stopped attending group training altogether, claiming an injury, which was hilarious, considering no one had touched him. His medical report cited severe muscle strain. The attending doctor, a Valtorian with absolutely no sense of humor, had apparently written it with a straight face. We all knew what severe muscle strain really meant. Fear-induced voluntary isolation. His 4 Crethan friends suddenly turned into model trainees, polite, focused, very careful about where they put their forearms. One of them even apologized to a Dravaki he'd shoved the week before. Apologized. A Crethan. I nearly choked on my stimulant drink. The rest of the species recalibrated faster than a nav computer under fire. Thoraxians who'd previously joined the harassment with enthusiasm now went out of their way to partner with humans during drills. The Sulfans started sharing equipment without being asked. Even the Dravak, proud and territorial by nature, began treating the human section of the barracks with cautious respect. Ethan spent 3 days recovering in the medical bay. When he returned to training, his ribs were wrapped and his eyes were still swollen shut. Mara watched his first session back with the focus of a targeting system. Nobody came within 5 feet of him unless they were offering help. But here's the part that really stuck with me. The humans didn't become arrogant. They didn't start pushing people around or demanding special treatment. They just kept training, helping each other, operating as this tight, cohesive unit that moved, thought, and reacted like a single organism. Navarro ran extra conditioning drills with Ethan every evening, rebuilding his strength piece by piece. Bergman shared his advanced combat notes with 3 other humans who were struggling with Crethan grappling techniques. A quiet human named Liang, someone I'd barely noticed before, turned out to be a tactical savant and started running strategy sessions for the entire human group. They weren't trying to dominate the hierarchy. They were ignoring it completely. They were building their own structure alongside the Academy's established order. And the most unsettling part? It worked better. On day 6, I observed a mixed-species training exercise, humans, Thoraxians, and Dravik working through a tactical scenario together. The humans naturally slipped into leadership roles, not because they demanded it, but because everyone else started looking to them for direction. Mara watched it all too. She made a quick note on her datapad, then gave that small, satisfied smile, the kind that tells you the plan worked exactly as intended. She knew what she'd done. The rest of us were only starting to catch on. On day 9, Mara left. On day 10, the Galactic Council's investigation team showed up. Funny how that timing lined up. 6 council representatives walked in. 3 of them were from species I'd never even encountered before. They carried datapads, recording equipment, and expressions that made it very clear our careers were hanging by a thread. They set up shop in the Academy's administrative center and immediately began calling instructors in for interviews. Instructor Drovek was first. He came out 2 hours later looking like he'd aged 10 years. Instructor Tharnak went next and emerged pale, shaking, and avoiding eye contact. When it was my turn, I sat across from a Xanthari adjudicator, compound eyes that missed nothing. mandibles that clicked in open irritation at every answer I gave. You observed trainee Cole being assaulted 17 times over a 4-week period, the adjudicator said, reading from his datapad. You filed 0 intervention reports. It was within training parameters, I said, and even I could hear how weak that sounded. Training parameters do not include fractured ribs, concussions, or a documented pattern of targeted harassment. Click, 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 went the mandibles. Lieutenant Commander Vance has provided extensive testimony, video evidence, medical records, witness statements from 43 trainees across 7 species. Of course she had. Of course she'd spent those 8 days quietly building an airtight case while smiling, observing, and taking notes, letting us believe she was just watching. Humans are terrifying. 3 instructors were dismissed that week, Drovek, Tharnok, and a Dravik named Kelrix, who, it turned out, had been running a betting pool on how long the humans would last. 5 more of us, including me, received formal reprimands and mandatory retraining in harassment prevention protocols. Jarek was expelled. Not technically for attacking Ethan, but for violations of the honor code, conduct unbecoming, and about 15 other regulations the council suddenly remembered were still on the books. His 3 remaining friends were suspended and placed on probation. The academy culture changed overnight. New policies, new oversight. A new understanding that hazing wasn't tradition, it was liability. I kept my position by the thinnest margin imaginable. I spent my nights reviewing case files, watching surveillance footage Mara had somehow accessed and compiled. And for the first time, I saw things clearly. What we had been calling education wasn't education at all. We had underestimated humans. We thought they were weak because they were small. Fragile because they bruised easily, easy targets because they didn't fight back right away. We forgot something important. Earth's most dangerous predators don't hunt alone. They plan, they coordinate, they wait for the perfect moment. And when they strike, they do it with absolute precision. So here I am, 16 cycles into my teaching career, now running sensitivity training for incoming instructors, teaching them what I learned the hard way. Humans aren't like us. They don't look dangerous, and that's the whole point. They evolved on a death world where everything bigger wanted to eat them, so they learned to be subtle about violence. They learned to organize, to strategize, to wait until the predator wasn't looking, then strike back with rocks, fire, and frankly unreasonable levels of creativity. Ethan graduated in the top 15% of his class, by the way, specialized in tactical command. Last I heard, he was serving aboard a galactic peacekeeping vessel, second in command under, yes, you guessed it, Lieutenant Commander Mara Vance. Humans kept enrolling at the academy after that. More every cycle. They still get knocked around sometimes, still take hits, still look fragile next to Krathon and Thoraxians. But now everyone remembers what happened when we mistook patience for weakness. The galaxy is full of species stronger than humans, faster than humans, better armed than humans. I haven't met one yet that's more dangerous. And that, colleagues, is why you should pay close attention when a human smiles and says nothing. That silence isn't hesitation. It's them doing math. You know, stories like this aren't really about aliens or academies. They're about what happens in real life when people confuse patience with weakness. Most humans don't strike back immediately. They watch, they learn, and they wait.